Amara stood at the bottom of the well where it all began. The air was cold and silent. The stone door leading to the dead city now served as an altar for her final ritual. She was no longer afraid. There was only a resolve as cold as stone. Carefully, she placed the black basalt urn on the ground. She opened a small box, retrieving the thick, dark paste she had prepared, the catalyst of freedom as she prepared to begin. The whisperer in her mind knew this was its last chance. It no longer relied on tricks or seduction. It launched a full assault of will. A ferocious psychic storm crashed over Amara. The fear, rage, and loneliness of 38,000 years hit her all at once. She saw thousands of overlapping hallucinations. Luxor. In flames, the puppet Callum, the heart of darkness screaming. It sought to crush her will with pure chaos, but Amara was ready. She didn't fight the storm. She stood firm at its center. She focused on a single image, her fallen comrades. She owed them this. She owed her father this. She owed herself this. Her hand, though trembling, remained utterly steady. She began the ritual. Using her finger, she took some of the catalyst and carefully retraced the Giza symbol from her arm onto the cold surface of the urn. As she drew, the paste seemed to react, emitting a faint greenish glow, identical to the light of the ancient altar. Next, she began to sing. Her voice echoed in the well, a solitary but powerful song. She sang the lullaby of the sea, the ancient. Words, carrying the energy of peace and sleep, spread outward, calming the psychic storm in her mind. The whisperer's screams weakened, becoming the whimper of a wounded beast lulled to sleep. It was time for the final act. Amara drew a small knife, looking at the scar on her forearm. She took a deep breath, then cut a new line over the old scar. Fresh blood, the blood of the keeper, flowed. She raised her bleeding arm over the urn. She let her blood, the key to the ritual, drip onto the symbol she had just drawn. The moment the first drop touched the catalyst, a reaction erupted. Blinding yet painless silver light formed, creating a bridge of energy connecting the scar on Amara's arm to the symbol on the urn, and then she felt it. A horrific tearing. It was as if part of her soul was being violently ripped from her body. The whisperer let out a final scream, not in sound, but in a psychic convulsion. Its entire memory, its entire existence, was sucked through the bridge of light. In a frenzied moment, Amara saw it all. Dead galaxies, civilizations risen and fallen. The loneliness of an entity trapped in darkness. She felt its pain and rage in a single second. She screamed, a real scream, and collapsed, and then silence. For the first time in days, her mind was completely silent. No whispers, no screams, no presence of another consciousness. Only the empty stillness of her own mind. It was over. Amara gasped, tears streaming down, but they were tears of release. She looked at the urn. It was no longer cold. It radiated a gentle warmth, and the Giza symbol she had drawn was now permanently etched into the stone surface like a final seal. The prison had a new prisoner. She looked at her hand. The dark scar of the mark had faded significantly, leaving only a faint silver-white scar, nearly invisible under the flashlight's glow. She was no longer a host, but she would forever be a jailer. This scar was a permanent reminder of that. Roll carefully, she wrapped the urn in cloth and placed it in her backpack. The burden was heavier now, but it was a burden she willingly took on. She stood, turning toward the spiral staircase. The journey of Amara Khalil, the archaeologist, ended here at the bottom of a cursed well. But the journey of Amara Khalil, the last keeper, had only just begun. She had a long road ahead, a promise to keep, and a prison to guard for the rest of her life. She began to climb, heading toward the circle of light in a world she had just saved in silence. Her journey was not over. It would never be over. *1 year. 365 days had passed since Amara Khalil climbed out of that infernal well, carrying a secret heavier than any artifact. A year of false names, midnight trains, and boarding houses. Never stayed in for more than a week now. Her home was a small, weathered wooden cabin perched on a cliff overlooking the Atlantic on Portugal's coast. The view was heartbreakingly beautiful, with white-capped waves crashing against the rocks and the piercing cries of seagulls greeting each dawn. To anyone else, it would be paradise. To Amara, it was just a prison with a better view. She had installed 3 new locks on the only door. Every night, she wedged a chair against the handle, and in the corner of her bedroom, always within sight, was a worn mountaineering backpack. It was unnaturally heavy. Inside, wrapped in layers of shockproof foam, was the black basalt urn. The prison of a god. Her burden, the scar on her arm, had faded to a thin silver-white line, but it was never truly quiet. It tingled when rain was coming, and occasionally stabbed with a cold, unannounced pain, like a ghostly echo from the prisoner. Within, she no longer heard the whispers. Her mind was truly silent, but that silence was more terrifying. It was the silence of a predator lying in wait that night. She dreamed the dream was not her own. No Luxor, no blood, no corridors of flesh. Instead, she found herself floating in a vivid purple nebula, surrounded by glowing crystalline monoliths. In the distance, twin suns, one gold, one red, slowly sank below a horizon of crystal mountains. There was no sound, only a resonance, a symphony of vibration she could feel with her entire soul. It was a strangely peaceful and familiar sensation. Then a colossal shadow, a void in space, eclipsed the twin suns. The resonance turned into a silent scream of loss. A feeling of shattering and being torn apart overwhelmed her. Amara jolted awake, heart pounding, drenched in cold sweat. It wasn't a nightmare. It was a memory that didn't belong to her. She clutched her head, trying to push away the alien sensation, the lingering echo of a sorrow not her own. She stumbled to the window, hoping the dawn could dispel the darkness in her mind. The sun was slowly rising over the sea, painting the sky pink. But something was wrong. The silence, an absolute silence. No piercing cries of seagulls as usual. No chirping of small birds in the bushes. Then it began. Thump. Faint sound came from the roof. Thump, thump. Then a soft impact against the glass door. Amara looked outside. A seagull had fallen onto the doorstep, its wings twitching weakly before going still. She looked up at the sky. A horrifying sight unfolded. Hundreds, thousands of seabirds were flying chaotically, disoriented. They no longer moved in flocks but collided with each other, spiraling like leaves in the wind. Then, one by one, they folded their wings and fell. They plummeted like stones, crashing onto the rocks below, into the sea, and onto the land around her cabin. The morning symphony had turned into a rain of death. Amara stepped back from the window, nausea rising. She knew what was happening. The birds' internal compasses had been destroyed by a powerful psychic energy surge. A surge she knew exactly where it came from. She turned, staring at the backpack in the corner. She could almost hear a low, barely perceptible hum emanating from it. The prison was leaking. The false peace was over. She couldn't stay here anymore. She couldn't stay anywhere too long. She was a plague, a walking calamity. Containing it was not enough. There was no panic. Only a cold, weary acceptance. She had prepared for this day. Amara calmly walked to the closet, pulling out a pre-packed travel bag. She checked the cash, fake passports, and essentials. She worked mechanically, not daring to look out the window, not daring to face the consequences of her presence. Finally, she slung the heavy backpack over her shoulder. Its weight seemed greater than before. She glanced around the cabin one last time, her temporary refuge, then she opened the door and stepped into a world shrouded in deadly silence. The life of a solitary keeper was over. The life of a fugitive began again, and this time she knew she couldn't just run. She had to find a final solution. While Amara drove an old Jeep through the Portuguese countryside, another discussion was unfolding in a starkly different setting. It was a penthouse office in Geneva, Switzerland. White marble floors, massive glass walls overlooking the serene Lake Leman, and air filtered to near sterile purity. Not a single paper cluttered the polished ebony desk. Only a holographic display projected a complex world map. A man in a perfectly tailored suit stood before the map, hands clasped behind his back. This was Valeries, a man with the face of a philosopher and the eyes of a shark. He stared at a blinking red dot on the Portuguese coast. A young aide, equally impeccably dressed, entered and stood respectfully. "Report, Anya," Valeries said without turning. "Sir, a new anomaly has occurred, as you predicted," Anya reported, her voice even. A level 4 psychic pulse, recorded at 5:43 local time. It caused mass disorientation in birds within a 15-kilometer radius. It matches previous leakage patterns, but the intensity has increased by 12%. Valeries nodded slightly. He reached out, his slender fingers gliding over the holographic map, connecting the new red dot to a series of others recorded over the past year. An unexplained blackout in a remote Greek village, a brief collective frenzy in a Maltese market, a sudden cessation of seismic activity near Sicily, a winding path across the Mediterranean. "She's moving," Valeries observed, his voice low and cold. "And the leakage is worsening. The prison is weakening. Should we intervene directly, sir?" Anya asked. "Gamma team is nearby." Valeries turned, and for the first time, a faint smile touched his lips. "Intervene, Anya. Why would we interfere with a miracle?" He stepped to the window, gazing at the placid lake. "This world is dying. It dies from chaos, from wars, from the selfish emotions of billions of individuals." Silas was right about the goal, but he was too impatient. "A blind martyr," Valeries turned back, his eyes gleaming with cold intelligence. "We don't worship a monster. We seek enlightenment. What lies within that urn, what we call the foundational consciousness, is the progenitor. It's not destruction, it's unity. A single consciousness, a shared purpose. The end of all conflict. It's humanity's inevitable evolution." He glanced at the red dot on the map. "Each leak is not an accident. It's our God's call, striving to break free to save those who imprisoned it. And this woman, the keeper, is unwittingly helping us." "What do you mean, sir?" "This shock will force her to act," Valeries explained. "She realized running is futile. She seek a more drastic solution. She lead us to the keys we need." He commanded the display to show a file. An image of Amara Khalil appeared, a photo from years ago. An intelligent, resolute face, eyes not yet haunted by what she'd seen. "Anya, deploy teams in Lisbon and Madrid. Monitor all airports, ports, and major rail routes. No contact, no exposure. Observe only. I want to know where she goes, who she meets, what she reads. Valeria stared at Amara's photo, a shark observing its prey from afar. Find the keeper, he ordered, and follow her. She lead us to liberation. He turned back to the lake. The vessel must be brought home. And a new dawn is coming. While Amara fought alone to keep the gates of hell closed, elsewhere, others were working to tear them open. The hunt had officially begun. From both sides, Rome greeted Amara with the organized chaos of a city that had stood for millennia. She didn't check into a hotel. Instead, she used one of her last false identities, an old research student card, to gain access to the Vatican Apostolic Library. If any place held the world's most ancient and esoteric texts, it was here. She needed a place to both hide and tap into vast knowledge in the solemn silence of the library. Amid towering shelves like skyscrapers and the scent of old paper and leather, Amara felt a fleeting sense of peace. This was her world. But the heavy backpack at her feet, with the cold basalt urn inside, reminded her she no longer belonged to it. She knew relying on the Whisperer's reactions for information was too dangerous. Each interaction risked weakening the prison. Now she had to rely on what she trusted most. Her father's intellect and her own research skills. She focused on his final notes, the most chaotic pages in his journal. She realized her father hadn't just studied the prison. He was searching for a final protocol, a fail-safe solution if containment failed. He repeatedly mentioned phrases like balanced destruction and sealing triangle. As she delved into her father's complex analysis of global geomagnetic anomalies, a sudden chill emanated from the urn in her backpack. A faint but unmistakable psychic pulse rippled outward. Amara looked up. The vast reading room grew unnaturally silent. A few students and an elderly priest at nearby tables froze. In a horrifying moment, they all slowly turned their heads, staring at her. For a second, their eyes turned pitch black, devoid of pupils. Devoid of life. Then, as quickly as it began, they blinked, their faces briefly confused as if forgetting what they were doing, and returned to their work. No one noticed what had happened except Amara. She sat frozen, cold sweat beading. It wasn't a hallucination. The entity, from within its prison, had touched the minds of those around her. Weakly, briefly, but it had done it. The prison was leaking. Worse than she thought. It was growing stronger. Panic spurred her. She had to find answers. Now she returned to her father's notes, her mind racing with frantic urgency. Sealing triangle, the thought sparked. She flipped to one of the journal's final pages. A crumpled sheet stained with coffee. It held a hand-drawn world map. Her father had marked 3 locations, forming a near-perfect triangle spanning the globe. A point in the Yucatan Peninsula, Mexico. Beside it, a small sketch of a feathered serpent and a burning meteor. A point high in the Himalayas near Nepal. Beside it, an odd flower and symbols resembling sound waves. A point in the wild outback of Australia. Beside it, an aboriginal spiral. And the words, Dreamtime, below the map. A single sentence in her father's trembling, desperate handwriting. It cannot be contained. It must be destroyed. 3 anchors. One final ritual. Amara stared at the map. Her heart pounded. This was it. No longer a mad hypothesis. This was a path, a plan, an almost impossible journey, but her only hope. The ritual of destruction, a strange relief, tinged with fear, washed over her. She had a goal. She knew what she had to do. She hurriedly packed. her things, tucking the journal and laptop into her backpack. She had to leave immediately to begin her hunt. As she stood and slung the backpack over her shoulder, a chill ran down her spine. A familiar sensation. The feeling of being watched. She didn't turn immediately. Slowly, calmly, she scanned the vast reading room. Most people were buried in their books. But on the upper balcony, far to the right, a man stood leaning against the railing, partially hidden by a shelf. He wasn't reading. He held a phone, seemingly talking, but his eyes were fixed on her when their gazes met. The man gave an almost imperceptible nod. Amara's heart stopped. It was them. The cult of the New Dawn. They had found her. No panic, no running. Amara simply turned and walked calmly toward the main exit. Each step was steady, but her mind screamed. The hunt was no longer a distant concept. It was here. The cat-and-mouse game had officially begun. Amara didn't run. Running would draw attention. Instead, she walked at a brisk but steady pace, blending into the crowd, leaving the library's main hall. Her heart hammered like a sledgehammer in her chest, but her face maintained the calm of a scholar finishing a day's research. She didn't dare look back. She used reflective surfaces to observe. The man's distorted image appeared in a glass display case, then on a polished brass doorknob. He kept a professional distance, phone still to his ear. He wasn't acting alone. He was coordinating. As she stepped outside, the glaring sunlight of St. Peter's Square made her squint. The library's solemn quiet gave way to the clamor of thousands of tourists. The crowd was both a shield and a trap. Suddenly, the scar on her arm stabbed with icy pain. The sensation came not from behind but from the left. She glanced quickly. A woman in a gray business suit, pretending to talk on her phone, had changed direction and was moving to cut her off. They were trying to box her in now. She ran, throwing caution aside. She sprinted forward, shoving through bewildered tourists, muttering, "Scusi, scusi." Shouts and curses erupted behind her, but she didn't care. She only knew she had to escape this open space. She veered into a narrow alley beside a souvenir shop, plunging into the maze of Rome's ancient streets in the Borgo district. This was her terrain. Cars couldn't follow here. The alleys were tight and winding, a chaotic tangle of cobblestones, clotheslines strung overhead, and sudden courtyards, but they were professionals. Her scar pulsed again, this time from the right. They were fanning out to surround her. The scar, her curse, had become an early warning system. A sixth sense, a compass of danger. A cold burn from behind. One was closing in. Amara swerved into an even narrower alley, kicking over a stack of trash cans, creating a loud crash and a temporary barrier. She kept running, her lungs burning. She hit a dead end. A small courtyard, three sides walled by ancient stone, the only entrance blocked by two men. One was the man from the library. They didn't draw weapons. They just stood, blocking her path, their cold eyes fixed on one thing, the backpack on her shoulder. "Dr. Khalil," one said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Don't make this harder. Hand over the vessel. It doesn't belong to you." Without thinking, she lunged and kicked it hard. The scooter teetered and crashed to the ground, the metallic clang piercing the air. The agents flinched, glancing at it for a second. That second was all she needed. But she didn't run toward the exit. She dashed to a rusty iron fire escape clinging to an old building's wall. She leapt, grabbing the lowest rung, and began to climb. "Get her," one shouted. They pursued, but they were bigger, heavier. The ladder shook under their weight. Amara reached the roof. A world of red terracotta tiles stretched before her. Without hesitation, she ran across the rooftops, leaping from building to building, a reckless act she never thought herself capable of. Below, the agents lost her trail. She kept moving until their shouts were distant echoes. She found another way down, sliding onto a balcony, then into another alley, blending into a bustling, entirely different neighborhood. She had escaped hours later in a cheap hotel room near Termini Station. Amara finally allowed herself to breathe. Her body was bruised and aching. The chase had proven one thing: they wouldn't give up. And they were everywhere. Staying in big cities was no longer safe. She opened her laptop, her heart still racing. She looked at her father's hand-drawn world map, at the 3 marked points. She needed a place where even a well-resourced organization would struggle to find her. Somewhere remote. While her fingers moved over the keyboard, booking a one-way flight under a false-named destination. Cancun, Mexico. The cult's hunt had forced her to accelerate her plans. The global crusade of the Keeper had officially begun. The transatlantic flight lasted 14 hours. For Amara, it was 14 hours trapped in a metal box suspended in the sky, with an even more terrifying prison at her feet. The backpack containing the basalt urn never left her side. She couldn't sleep. Instead, she used the time to research. She was no longer just an Egyptologist. She had become a comparative mythologist, a spiritual geologist. On her encrypted laptop, she searched for connections, recurring motifs across cultures. The story of an entity from the stars, imprisoned by ancient peoples, wasn't unique to Egypt. She found echoes of it in Mayan legends, Sumerian texts, and Australian tribal lore. Her father had been on the right track. He had seen a global picture when the plane landed in Cancun, Mexico. A wave of humid heat hit her. Everything here was different. The colors were brighter, the sounds louder. The air carried a distinct blend of sea, flowers, and exhaust fumes. The whisperer in her mind, silent throughout the flight, now stirred with an alien curiosity. It was sensing a wholly new world. Amara didn't stay in the tourist area. She took a bus deep inland to a small, dusty town called Valladolid, near the location her father had marked on his map. She rented a cheap room and turned it into a temporary command center. Her target was a specific cenote, a natural sinkhole deep in the jungle. Her father's notes called it the Meteor Cenote, but the locals had another name. Amara spent a day searching for a guide. But every time she mentioned Cenote Xibalba, the sinkhole of the underworld, the people she approached changed demeanor. They stepped back, shook their heads, made the sign of the cross, or muttered words in ancient Mayan. That place is cursed, a street vendor told her. It's a gateway to the underworld. Those who enter never return. Or if they do, they come back mad, possessed by the spirits of the jungle. She was nearly desperate. She couldn't venture into the endless jungle alone as she sat in a small cafe, trying to devise a new plan. An older man approached her table. He had sun-weathered, wrinkled skin and sharp, dark eyes. "You're looking for someone to take you to Cenote Xibalba?" he asked in English, his voice gravelly. "Yes." Amara replied, wary. "Why, I'm a geologist," Amara lied. "I heard it has unique rock formations from a meteor impact. I just need to collect some rock and water samples." The man, named Matteo, studied her for a long moment. "I've seen people like you before. Scientists, treasure hunters. The jungle has swallowed them all. I'll pay well," Amara said. Placing a stack of cash on the table, Matteo glanced at the money, then back at Amara's determined eyes. He sighed. I'll take you to the edge of the cursed area. I'll show you the trail. That's it. I won't go in. And you must be out before sunset. At night, the jungle no longer belongs to the human world. Deal. Amara said immediately. The next morning, they set off in Mateo's rickety truck. The paved road quickly vanished, giving way to a bumpy red dirt path. Then that too disappeared, and they drove through the jungle. The air inside the jungle was stifling and teeming with life. Thick foliage blocked the sun. The incessant buzz of insects formed a wall of sound. The whisperer in the urn seemed to sense the change. It wasn't fearful as it had been in the monastery, but alert, recognizing another ancient power of earth. Trees and blood soaked into this land through centuries of sacrifice. Finally, Mateo stopped the truck beside a nearly overgrown trail. "This is the entrance," he said, his face grim. "Walk this path for about an hour, and you'll see a depression in the ground. That's it. Remember my warning, girl. Don't stay past sunset." Amara nodded her thanks. She slung the heavy backpack over her shoulder, checked her compass and gear, and looked into the deep green darkness of the jungle. A familiar unease crept in. Now tempered by steely resolve, she stepped onto the trail, alone, venturing deeper into the realm of the serpent god, where the heart of a meteor awaited beneath the waters of the underworld. The trail Mateo showed Amara wasn't truly a path. It was a faint passage through dense foliage, a barely visible scar in the ancient jungle. Amara had to use a machete to clear sections. The air was thick, hot, and humid, and the cries of insects and unseen creatures formed a relentless, piercing symphony. This jungle was alive and primal, and it was watching her. After nearly an hour of exhausting trekking, the air shifted. The trees thinned, and the ground began to slope downward. She had arrived. Before her was a massive pit, an almost perfect circle, carved deep into the earth, as if a giant god's finger had pressed down here. The walls were sheer, draped in vines and green moss, descending to clear, still, and pitch-black water below. This was Cenote Xibalba. The silence here was near, absolute, starkly different from the jungle's clamor. It was the silence of anticipation. The whisperer in the urn seemed to sense it too. It was no longer sullenly silent, but alertly so. It recognized another power here, as ancient as itself, but alien. Amara prepared her equipment. She donned a thin diving suit, checked her oxygen tank, flashlight, and tools. The backpack with the basalt urn was strapped tightly to her back, an inseparable burden. Using ropes and specialized climbing gear, she carefully descended the slick stone wall. When her feet touched the water, a sudden biting cold pierced her suit. The water was far colder than she expected. She took a final breath of jungle air, put on her mask, and submerged. The world above vanished. Only the oppressive silence of the underworld and her steady breathing remained. The water was astonishingly clear. Her flashlight illuminated an underwater cathedral. Massive stalactites, formed over millennia, hung from the ceiling and rose from the floor, creating a limestone maze based on her father's notes. Amara knew the meteor fragment wasn't in this main cavern. She had to find a narrow passage leading to a deeper, secondary chamber. She found it behind a large stalactite, a dark, jagged crevice. As she swam into it, claustrophobia set in. The passage was so tight, her oxygen tank occasionally scraped the walls. The darkness was thick, seemingly trying to swallow the faint beam of her flashlight asterisk. At this moment, the whisperer stirred. A low psychic hum, a feeling of unease and jealousy. It recognized the power here and didn't like it. This disturbance made it harder for Amara to focus as she ventured deeper. She began to see the creatures of this abyss. Small, pale, eyeless fish swam sluggishly. Long, translucent eels slithered from rock crevices. They didn't attack, but their existence testified to the anomalous energy that had permeated this place for centuries. She emerged from the tight passage into a second, larger cavern. At its center, on a natural stone pedestal, was her. Targeted was a jet-black stone, the size of a human head, its surface smooth as glass. It didn't reflect her flashlight's beam. Instead, it seemed to absorb light. The meteor's heart as Amara swam closer. The water around her began to vibrate. She sensed another presence. A massive shadow glided past the edge of her light. She swung her flashlight, but saw nothing. Then she saw it. A psychic illusion created by the stone to protect itself. In the surrounding darkness, a form slowly took shape. A colossal serpent, unimaginably long, its scales shimmering faintly. Its eyes were two glowing green points, emotionless and ancient. Staring at her, Kukulkan, the Mayan feathered serpent god, it didn't attack. It watched. A spiritual guardian of a cosmic relic. Amara's heart pounded, but she forced herself to stay calm. It wasn't real. It was a defense mechanism. She repeated the mantra, trying to believe it, ignoring the serpent illusion. She swam to the pedestal. The psychic pressure grew, as if she were pushing against an invisible current. The illusory serpent seemed to grow, coiling around her in the darkness. Finally, her hand touched the obsidian stone. It wasn't hot or cold. It held a heavy, compressed energy. She carefully placed it into a specialized mesh bag.
In the shadow of my archive, a new horror stirs. Date to listen.